Maya Johnson had never been on a flight quite like this one. At 17, she was used to the quiet confidence that came with living in a family where excellence was a given. But even so, the sleek leather chairs of first class, the soft hum of the engines, and the smooth service had her feeling a little more at ease than usual. Maya wasn't someone who needed designer luggage or flashy jewelry to feel at home. She was the type who carried herself with the quiet power of knowing who she was. Maya had a gift in her lap, a cheesecake. Not just any cheesecake, but one from a little bakery in Brooklyn that her grandmother adored. The bakery had been around for decades, serving up desserts so delicious that Maya's grandmother had always dreamed of buying one, but never had. This particular cheesecake, carefully packed in a box tied with a red ribbon, was headed to her grandmother in Los Angeles. Maya couldn't wait to share it with her. She handed over her boarding pass to the flight attendant with a soft smile, and then proceeded through the jet bridge with a quiet sense of calm. She was used to boarding planes. She was used to first class, but she didn't show it off. Maya had grown up in a household where dignity wasn't optional, where her father used to remind her, every time you step into the world, wear the family name like a tailored suit. Don't wrinkle it. As she entered the cabin, she noticed the cold stares of a few passengers, but she brushed it off. Maya was used to walking into spaces where her presence felt like an anomaly. People were still adjusting to the fact that there was more than one way to belong in first class. Then she noticed her, the woman in seat 1B, wearing a gray power suit, her platinum blonde hair pulled back in a stiff, perfect knot. Her eyes snapped up from behind a glass of champagne, and in that moment, the woman's gaze told Maya all she needed to know. "Excuse me, sweetheart." The woman's voice was dripping with that saccharine sweetness that preceded a sharp jab. "Coach is that way." Maya's gaze stayed steady, her body calm as she met the woman's icy stare. She could feel the tension in the air, the invisible judgment that seeped from the woman like an uncomfortable heat. "I'm in 1A, Maya said, her voice measured, polite, with just enough of a smile to match the situation. The woman's face twisted in disbelief. "That's not possible. They don't just give away first-class seats like that. Are you sure you're in the right place?" Maya didn't flinch. She'd heard these words before, not just in airports, but in classrooms, at events, in boardrooms. The words people used to remind her that she didn't belong, that her success wasn't earned the right way. But Maya's parents had taught her well, don't react in anger. Respond with composure. The woman sneered, her gaze moving from Maya's hoodie to her red sneakers, a clear disdain crossing her features. "Guess they've let anyone in these days," she muttered just loud enough for others to hear. Maya felt the weight of the comment, but kept her focus on something more important. The cheesecake. Maya sat down, placing the box carefully on the tray table, checking if the icing had survived the flight. The seatbelt sign pinged, but she barely noticed. Her focus was on the task at hand. The cheesecake had to be perfect for her grandmother. The flight attendant approached, sensing the tension. She scanned Maya's boarding pass, then turned to the woman in seat 1B. "She's right where she belongs, ma'am," the flight attendant said, her voice firm, yet polite. The woman scoffed, turned away with a huff, and muttered something about brand standards. But Maya didn't respond. She simply opened the box, slowly, carefully, as if everything in that moment depended on her maintaining control. The cheesecake was safe, the icing intact. Maya smiled a small, quiet smile, and she could feel it. The woman's stare, piercing, relentless, trying to force her to shrink, to feel small. But Maya had grown up with a different understanding of her place in the world. Her family had fought to be here, to be seen, to be recognized. And Maya wasn't about to let one person's prejudice make her feel otherwise. A few moments passed. Maya could feel the air growing heavier, more uncomfortable. The woman across the aisle was still glaring, her gaze burning with judgment. But Maya remained calm, breathing in and out slowly. Her father's voice echoed in her head. "Your silence is not submission. It's strategy." Just as the air in the cabin seemed to get tighter, the woman pressed the call button. A flight attendant appeared, poised and professional. The woman pointed a finger toward Maya, practically sneering. "Are you seriously planning to serve me my meal next to her?" Maya didn't respond. Her heart didn't race. She wasn't afraid, just aware. The flight attendant didn't flinch. "Yes, ma'am. All first-class passengers receive the same service," she said, her tone unwavering. But the woman didn't let it go. "Well, bring me plastic cutlery then. I won't eat anything that's been near her." Her voice was sharp, laden with contempt. Maya's grip on the armrest tightened ever so slightly. It wasn't fear. It was the heavy, familiar weight of a battle she didn't choose. The woman's words were harsh, but Maya wasn't about to let them land. She wasn't going to fight with her voice. Not yet. She reached for her leather-bound journal, the one she used for her thoughts, her reflections. This was not a glittery diary filled with secrets, but a tool, a place where her fire could safely burn. Maya uncapped her pen and began writing, slow, steady, deliberate. She could feel the woman leaning closer, her perfume suffocating. "You should be grateful you're even here," the woman hissed. "You don't understand what it means to earn this kind of seat. My family's been flying first class since before you were born." Maya paused, put the pen down, and raised her eyes slowly. The woman's words hung in the air like smoke, and Maya knew exactly what this was. She tilted her head, just slightly, and then spoke in a voice soft enough to slice through the tension in the room. "And you look like someone terrified that these seats are finally becoming available to more than just your kind." The words landed. The silence that followed was palpable. The woman froze. Then, as if her entire identity had been cracked open in that instant, she leaned back in her seat. The cabin shifted, imperceptibly at first. Heads turned, murmurs began. The eyes of the passengers around them flickered toward Maya, some of them uncomfortable, others starting to catch on to what had just happened. Maya didn't say another word. She simply returned to her journal, resuming her writing. Quiet, calm, unbothered. And in that moment, the woman in seat 1B had just learned a lesson she wouldn't forget. The flight continued with an uncomfortable stillness that hung over the cabin, thick and palpable. Maya remained poised, her calm an unspoken answer to the chaos unfolding around her. She didn't need to react. Her silence spoke louder than any words could. As she sipped her water, her eyes occasionally flicked toward the woman in seat 1B, who was now glaring at the window, her face flushed with a mix of embarrassment and rage. The air around Maya felt different now. The tension in the room had shifted, and it wasn't just the woman's discomfort that changed the dynamic. It was the subtle, almost imperceptible shift in how the other passengers were starting to look at her, not as an anomaly, but as someone who had just claimed her rightful place. The attention that had been trained on her in judgment moments before was now focused on the woman, whose sharp words and blatant racism had backfired in a way that no one in the cabin could ignore. The man sitting across the aisle from Maya, who had been quietly observing everything unfold, was the first to break the silence. He had been discreet, sitting with his phone angled just enough to capture the exchange, his fingers moving quickly, and he had a camera rolling. No edits, no dramatic music, just raw footage. It was subtle, but the man had been quietly documenting the entire ordeal. As Maya flipped through the pages of her journal, the woman continued to stew in her seat, her fingers tapping nervously on the armrest. Her mouth opened a few times, ready to speak, but nothing came out. It was as if she couldn't find the words that would justify her actions, and perhaps, for the first time, she realized there was no justification for them. The flight attendants moved around the cabin, offering snacks and drinks, but none of them made eye contact with the woman. They were too busy, too professional. It was as though the incident had already been internally documented, and the woman was no longer a priority. A few passengers in the surrounding rows gave subtle, knowing glances at Maya, while others tried to ignore the growing tension. But the weight of the injustice, the shift in the atmosphere, was undeniable. Maya's calm was unwavering. She wasn't going to let her peace be disturbed. She didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Not with words, not with gestures. She simply existed in a way that commanded respect without asking for it. The woman in 1B, however, couldn't let it go. The discomfort was gnawing at her, and the weight of the truth she had been confronted with was clearly eating at her insides. She turned to the flight attendant once more. Is this really how you handle things here? The woman snapped, voice rising once again. I've been flying first class for years, and I've never had to deal with this kind of person. The flight attendant remained calm, offering nothing more than a polite nod. Ma'am, I've already told you. This passenger is in the correct seat. Please refrain from insulting anyone else on this flight. The woman was visibly shaken. Her upper lip quivered slightly, and her face turned a deeper shade of crimson. Maya could see her grip tightening on the armrest, her knuckles pale. This was no longer about seats or status. It was about ego, about pride, and a woman who couldn't accept being wrong. Tamara, the woman in 1B, had made the mistake of thinking she was untouchable, that her wealth, her status, and her years of flying first class made her superior. But Maya wasn't concerned with superiority. She was concerned with dignity, respect, and treating people as they deserved. In that instant, it became clear to Maya that Tamara's sense of entitlement wasn't just about a seat. It was about power, the power to make others feel small. But in her attempts to put Maya down, she had unwittingly made herself the target of ridicule. Finally, the flight manager arrived. He was tall, well-groomed, his face stoic as he approached the woman's seat. He stopped in front of Tamara, his professional demeanor unwavering. He adjusted his tie and glanced at his tablet, tapping it a few times before making eye contact with the woman. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, his voice calm but firm. "We've received a report about inappropriate behavior in this cabin. I need you to cease insulting other passengers immediately." Tamara's eyes widened in disbelief. "A report? On me? I have connections with the board of this airline. Do you have any idea who I am?" Her voice was rising now, the arrogance unmistakable. The flight manager didn't flinch. He glanced at his tablet again, scrolling for a moment, and then, with a slight shift in his posture, he turned his attention to Maya. The change was subtle, but Maya saw it. His posture softened, and the look on his face shifted from professional indifference to something more personal. "Maya," he said, glancing back at her. "You're fine. Thank you for your patience." It was only then that the woman in 1B seemed to understand the full extent of the situation. The flight manager didn't need to say anything more. The look on his face, the respect he showed Maya, who was simply trying to enjoy her flight, spoke volumes. It wasn't just about following the rules. It was about seeing people, truly seeing them, and honoring their dignity. Tamara's face went pale, and for the first time, she truly understood who she was dealing with. She wasn't just sitting next to a girl in first class. She was sitting next to someone whose calm had completely undone her. The woman opened her mouth, but no words came out. She knew. She knew it was too late. And Maya? She just returned to her journal, uncapping her pen and resuming her writing. Her focus was razor-sharp, as if the events around her were nothing but the noise of the world that would soon fade away. The cabin was still, but the air felt lighter now, as if the moment of tension had passed and been replaced with something else entirely. Maya's silence was a weapon, calm, collected, unwavering. She had let the moment speak for her, and it was clear the woman in 1B hadn't realized the full weight of what was happening until it was too late. Maya's gaze was fixed on her journal again. She had already moved on. The confrontation was over. For her, it was just another instance of standing her ground, of making sure the world saw her for what she was, a person, not an assumption, not a stereotype. But for the woman in 1B, it was only the beginning of her realization. The flight continued, but the energy in the cabin had shifted. The earlier discomfort in the air had morphed into something more complex. People were uncomfortable with what they had witnessed, unsure of how to respond, but all aware that something had happened. Something had changed. Tamara in 1B didn't say another word. She had turned toward the window, her lips pressed tightly together as if trying to hold onto the remnants of her self-made superiority. Maya didn't look her way again. There was nothing left to say. The flight passed uneventfully. Maya, as calm as ever, opened her water bottle with measured precision, occasionally scribbling something in her journal, letting the silence speak for itself. It was an uncomfortable silence for those around her, but Maya was used to it. She knew that sometimes Silence was louder than anything you could say. And then the inevitable happened. The plane began its descent toward Los Angeles. As the wheels touched the runway with a familiar bounce, passengers began to stir, retrieving their bags and stretching. It was as if nothing had happened, as if the drama of the last few hours had never existed. The woman in 1B was still sitting, her arms crossed tightly, but there was something different about her now. Her once untouchable demeanor had crumbled, and she looked smaller, defeated, as if all the air she'd put on had dissipated. Maya's father, Alan Whitman, was waiting at the gate when the plane finally landed. Maya had already been expecting him, but the moment she laid eyes on him, she felt something shift in the air. His presence was commanding, tall, sharp, with an aura of authority that no one could ignore. He was, after all, one of the most influential media moguls in the country. But there was something else in the way he stood there, waiting for his daughter. It wasn't just power. It was love and pride. As Maya walked through the gate, the woman in 1B noticed her father immediately. Her eyes widened in recognition. For the first time since the flight had started, her posture faltered. She had been so sure of her position, so certain of her superiority, but now, seeing the man who was clearly Maya's father, he was no ordinary man. Her arrogance started to evaporate. Maya walked toward him slowly, her movements graceful, composed. She didn't rush. She didn't need to. She was centered, calm, the cheesecake box still resting gently in her arms. "Hey, princess," Alan said with a knowing smile. "How was the flight?" "Peaceful," Maya responded with a soft smile of her own, "but a little loud in row 1. Alan chuckled, low and proud, clearly aware of what had transpired. "I saw it coming," he said, his voice quiet, but his pride in his daughter evident. But before either of them could leave the terminal, the woman in 1B, now clearly rattled, stepped forward, dragging her designer tote behind her. She had a pale, defeated look on her face, her lips trembling slightly. She stopped in front of Alan and hesitated, clearly unsure of how to address the man she had no idea was Maya's father. "Excuse me," she said, her voice shaky, her mouth barely opening. "She's your daughter?" Alan didn't need to ask who she was talking about. He nodded slowly, his presence unshaken. "Yes, she is." The woman's eyes darted from Maya to Alan and back again, clearly processing the information for the first time. "I didn't know." Alan didn't allow her to continue. He took a step forward, his voice calm but firm. "That's the problem, ma'am. People never know who they're disrespecting until it's too late." The woman's face flushed. For the first time, she looked small, diminished. She took a step back, her gaze dropping to the floor as if she had lost the ability to stand her ground. Maya didn't speak. She didn't need to. The words had already been said, and they had landed exactly where they needed to. She glanced at her father, and the two of them walked out of the terminal together. No need for words. They knew exactly what had just happened. The incident would soon spread. Maya didn't need to say anything more. The viral video shot by the man across the aisle was already making its rounds on social media. It was simple, raw footage, unedited, capturing the woman's condescension, her demand for separate cutlery, her cruel comments. And then Maya's poised response. The world was seeing her dignity and her strength in a way they hadn't seen before. By the time they reached the car, the world was already taking notice. The video racked up millions of views. People were talking about the first-class incident, discussing dignity, race, and respect. And amid all the noise, Maya remained quiet. She didn't need to comment. She didn't need to bask in the spotlight. But the world was listening, and Maya had delivered a lesson in grace, strength, and the true meaning of dignity.